Hello, we stepped into 2021 with some confidence on the back of a promise that the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic might soon be over. The vaccine has been found. But even as vaccinations are underway across the globe as I speak, the virus continues to wreak havoc in some parts of the world, particularly in the West.
The White House is a symbol right around the world of US leadership. And in the next few weeks, it'll be at the center of global attention as the new US president enters his new home. But in its fight against COVID-19, America is leading the world in ways it never would have wanted to, with the highest number of infections and the highest number of deaths. And as America heads into 2021, the virus shows no signs of slowing. Hospitalizations are reaching record highs, intensive care units are filling up. But in much of the country, life is continuing really quite unchanged. Because of the piecemeal way that each state gets to decide their own pandemic rules, there are very few uniform policies and there are very few lockdowns. California is a notable exception where about 20 million people are under very strict orders. But it's perhaps not so much that pandemic fatigue has set in America. It's perhaps the case that in some parts of the country, people have never really taken it that seriously.
I think a lot of it is exaggerated. If you see the statistics on the flu and heart attacks and all that kind of stuff, they say we hardly had any. Everything is just being counted as COVID, and I don't know. I'm just afraid the whole thing is too politically motivated. I mean, it's a terrible flu, don't get me wrong, but I don't know, it's just too weird. I'm not buying the whole story.
I think most of that's propaganda. We haven't known anybody who's got it. So, you know, on the ground, actually living in the United States, we don't see a big pandemic and haven't known anybody. No person that I've come in contact with has even had it. So it doesn't add up.
The vaccination rollout in America is underway, but already the US government is missing its own targets for the number of people that it wanted to vaccinate. Here at Capitol Hill, the stands are already going up for Joe Biden's inauguration that takes place on January the 20th. Perhaps the biggest challenge for the new president when he enters office is giving hope to Americans that there are better times ahead.
The New Year's ball drop typically attracts thousands of people here to Times Square in New York. But for the first time since World War II, the ball came down without a large crowd in attendance. It's yet another tradition impacted by the pandemic. Times Square is known as the crossroads of the world, and typically around 380,000 people would pass through it on a daily basis. But since COVID-19 hit, that number has fallen dramatically.
It's really sad. When I was walking here today, I noticed so many restaurants and stores that are closed and just completely closed. They're not going to open again. We're losing so much with this pandemic. It's really just very sad.
No energy. It's really, it's sad. This is not the Times Square that I'm used to seeing when I do come down here. So it's very sad.
As usually, Times Square always be crowded. That's why I always come here to see people walking, because I really love that. So right now it's look different.
We're just a stone's throw away from New York's iconic Broadway theatres, but ticket offices like this remain firmly shut. And it's believed that Broadway shows will remain closed until at least late May. Throughout the pandemic, many have likened Times Square to a ghost town. But New York City's Mayor Bill de Blasio now hopes to vaccinate up to 1 million residents by the end of the month. The hope is that will inject a little soul into the city.
Piccadilly Circus in central London, normally thronging with thousands of tourists from all over the world, but also Londoners going about their business. At the moment, largely empty. Off to my right is Regent Street, which runs up to Oxford Street, normally two of the busiest shopping streets in the world. At the moment, the non-essential retail is boarded up and the shoppers are at home. Also behind me in that direction, London's West End, the theatre district, the capital of theatre when it comes to the whole European continent. Most of those shows have been shut for the majority of 2020 and will remain closed for weeks to come. All of the UK is under some kind of lockdown, but England's restrictions look set to be in place until mid-February at least. Dozens of businesses, office spaces which would normally be filled with thousands of workers. An impact on those businesses, but also on the supermarkets, the newsagents, the cafes in this area which rely on the trade from the workers that fill the offices. The UK government has spent billions and billions of dollars in economic support, but the economy has taken a huge hit, and it's expected it could take an even bigger one once the economic support starts to be unwound. The government now vastly reliant on its vaccination program. It says it can inoculate many of the most vulnerable and prioritized people by the middle of February and then start to unwind restrictions. But if it doesn't hit those vaccination targets, that is going to be politically very difficult indeed. The polling suggests the British public is currently behind the latest round of lockdowns, but the polling also suggests people are very anxious about the year ahead and have a huge level of disquiet about how the government has handled the crisis so far. 2021 is going to be a difficult year for the United Kingdom.
No New Year revelries, no grand fireworks to usher in 2021. In Asia, as in other parts of the world, we've accepted and adapted to a new normal brought on by the pandemic. Lives must go on, albeit with a limp.
New Year's Eve celebrations in Delhi are synonymous with Connaught Place. This iconic shopping complex in the heart of Delhi is home to hundreds of bars and restaurants, and every year on the 31st of December, thousands come here to ring in the new year. There are dance parties, musicians out on these streets, and it's next to impossible to get any elbow room in these lanes. But this year, Connaught Place wore a deserted look. A night curfew was imposed, no public gatherings were allowed, traffic was stopped, and only those who had prior reservations were allowed to come to this marketplace. Out on the streets, prohibitory orders were in place, which meant that not more than 5 people could congregate, and anyone found on the streets after 8 p.m. needed prior government permission. Rajiv Chowk, which is the largest subway station in Delhi, was shut down too to prevent people getting to Connaught Place. But these restrictions were lifted after the 2nd of January, and as you can see, the hustle-bustle here in Connaught Place is back.
Every year we really look forward for this time just to go out, spend time, see maybe not to a particular restaurant but idhar-udhar Delhi mein, just because there are so many celebrations going on. So this time it was little disappointed because we had to be restricted at home.
किसी भी क्रिसमस पे किसी फंक्शन पे भी नहीं मिल पाए. ये साल तो जो है बहुत ही बुरा बीता है 2020 तो. आने वाले जो है 2021 में हमें उम्मीद है कि जल्दी जो है हमें मास्क से छुटकारा मिले, बीमारी से छुटकारा मिले कोरोना से.
India's COVID-19 immunization drive is set to begin later this month. The government has already given emergency authorization to the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine as well as a local candidate. Dry runs have begun in different parts of the country, and the government says in just a few weeks 30 million Indians will get their first jabs of this vaccine, which is why there is a sense of cautious optimism here in India.
Now this is the Pukchon Hanok village, one of the most popular tourist sites in the capital Seoul. Now many people come here to come and see the traditional Korean homes called Hanok, with their wooden gates and their traditional roof tiles. Many of the traditional Hanok homes have been converted into trendy shops and restaurants. But for nearly a year, it's been very quiet as foreign tourists stopped coming due to the COVID-19 pandemic. South Koreans also stayed away as the government imposed strict gathering restrictions. For nearly 3 weeks, there's been a ban on more than 4 people gathering in one place, and said they can't go to restaurants together or even walk around. And that is badly hurting small businesses and shops like this in Pukchon village.
이쪽 상점들이 다 비어 있어요. 지금 가게 오픈도 하지 않고 저희도 이제 10년째 하고 있어서 그냥 간간히 버티고 있는 수준입니다. 희망을 갖고 있죠.
This owner tells me she opened this shop only about 3 months before the pandemic hit the country.
지금은 뭐 없죠, 뭐 아예. 또 한두 번 오시기도 하고 한국 분들. 코로나가 일단은 그나마 조금 종식이 돼서 해외에도 왔다 갔다 하고.
Others said they were looking forward for the vaccinations, likely to start sometime next month or March.
좀 희망적이에요. 뭔가 하반기에는 백신을 다 맞을 수 있을 것 같고.
작년에나 뭔지도 모르고 되게 좀 막막하고 좀 힘들었던 것 같은데 좀 적응이 됐으니까.
Now, people don't think that things are going to go back to the old days before the outbreak of this COVID-19 pandemic. But they are hopeful that things will get better and that eventually tourists will return to enjoy what their country has to offer.
It's bustling here at Kandamyojin. This shrine was founded in 730 AD, and it's regarded as the guardian shrine of Tokyo, which was then called Edo. Now, on this side is Daikoku-sama, which is one of the 3 deities of this shrine. Now, if you look around, it's quite a cozy shrine. Usually there are around 2 million visiting the shrine in a year, and during the first 3 days of the New Year's it's about 300,000. But this time, the people here in the shrine say that the number of visitors have fallen by about 60%. It's because they've limited the number of people who can actually enter the shrine to offer their prayers. Usually there are around 5,000 companies represented visiting the first 3 days. However, this time they decided that only 7 people can come and offer their prayers. Now, the shrine is known to bring prosperity and wealth to corporations.
商売繁盛でお仕事で来ました。
どういうお仕事されてるんですか？
美容関係ですね。
今年はコロナも収まって安定した年になればいいなということを。
It's difficult times for shrines and temples to survive here in Japan. So, Kandamyojin is trying to advance in digitalization. You can go online to check on how crowded it is here at the shrine. You can also go online to purchase lucky charms.
A brand new year and brighter days ahead. Much like Japan, millions here in Myanmar are praying in the new year that 2021 will be a turning point of sorts for the country.
Myanmar is still at a crossroads. State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy Party may have been given a renewed mandate at the recent general elections, but the road ahead is still filled with challenges that are all too easy to spot. Take the quiet and empty Shwedagon Pagoda behind me. In the past, devotees would come by Myanmar's largest pagoda to mark the start of the year. Now, devotees can only pray briefly at the pagoda's doorsteps. That's because COVID-19 measures that have been in place for the last year make sure that there are no large gatherings here or at many other places in Myanmar. Schools across the country remain closed and students have been learning from home. In the meantime, empty schools like this one here are turned into quarantine centers to share the load with medical facilities. Still, 2021 is the year of hope for many.
2020ကတော့စိတ်မကောင်းစရာတွေများတာပေါ့ကိုယ့်ရဲ့အတိမိတ်ဆွေတွေအကုန်တော်တော်များများဒီကိုဗစ်နဲ့တွားလိုက်တဲ့လူတွေလည်းများတယ်နောက်ပြီးတော့စီးပွားရေးလည်းအဆင်မပြေဘူးပေါ့နော်2021မှာတော့မျှော်လင့်ထားတာတော့အများကြီးပဲပေါ့စီးပွားရေးတွေအားလုံးပြန်လဲပြေလည်သွားမယ်အားလုံးကျန်းမာရေးတွေအရင်ထက်စာပြီးတော့ပိုကောင်းလာမယ်ဒီကာကွယ်ဆေးကအများကြီးချိန်နေကောင်းမယ်လို့ထင်ပါတယ်ဘာဖြစ်လို့လဲဆိုတော့ဒါအားလုံးအတွက်သူလည်းအသက်ကယ်ဟိုအသက်ကိုကယ်တာပဲလေဒီဆေးကိုပေါ်ဆက်တာအားလုံးအတွက်ကောင်းမယ်ထင်ပါတယ်ဗျာ
The government has signed a deal with India to buy vaccines which could arrive as early as February. Myanmar is also in talks with the COVAX facility, which will give it access to free or discounted vaccines, which are expected to arrive in April. Indeed, these vaccines would be an important shot in the arm for Myanmar. Like other countries, Myanmar's healthcare sector has been put to the test. The country's resources stretched and its economy having taken a hit. The Myanmar government has also set its sights firmly on another important commitment, bringing peace to the country. And it seems 2021 got off to a good start.
Myanmar marked Independence Day on January 4th, but that's also the day that sparked the recent conflict in Rakhine State. On January 4th, 2019, the Arakan army attacked 4 police posts in northern Rakhine. But things took a turn for the better recently. The Arakan army had stopped fighting ahead of Myanmar's November 8 elections in 2020. Since then, there had been several informal talks between the Arakan and Myanmar armies. And both sides look set to be on track to sign a truce, which would be a big boost to the country's peace process. The NLD-led government under Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi will have 5 more years ahead of it. On the one hand, the road ahead will be filled with obstacles. On the other hand, its path is also laid with hopes.
Thais were hoping for a good start into the new year, but a surge of domestic COVID-19 cases has people worried that the country could go into another lockdown. Now, the origin of the current outbreak is being traced back to Samut Sakhon province, just an hour away, to a local fish market, and officials are blaming illegal migrant workers from Myanmar dodging quarantine and bringing the virus in. Now, as of now, life in Bangkok still goes on as usual. People are still going on about their daily lives, even though they're being told to restrict their movements. Food is still available, even though dining times have already been restricted. Now, the government is still shying away from calling a nationwide lockdown whatsoever, and instead opting for a more localized and flexible approach, giving provincial governors powers to implement any measures as they see fit. Now, this has caused some mixed messaging, and the government has also threatened that if things do not get better, the nation could actually go into a hard lockdown, and that has people worried.
โอ้ยหนักกว่าเก่าครับพูดให้ฟังเลยนะมารอบ2นี่อาจหนักกว่าเก่าเยอะเพราะไม่ได้ตั้งตัวกันแล้วคิดว่ามันหายไปแล้วตอนนี้กลับมาใหม่วันนี้หนักกว่าเก่าเลยไม่สบายใจถามว่าเครียดไหมก็เครียดแต่ก็มานั่งคิดในใจว่าถ้าเครียดไปก็เท่านั้นถ้าเรามีสติแล้วก็อยู่กับมันแล้วก็ดูแลตัวเองแล้วก็ดูแลคนรอบข้างให้มันผ่านไปได้ด้วยกันมันก็น่าจะเป็นทางแก้ด้วยดีกว่าเครียดแล้วก็ไม่ทำอะไรเลย
Now, the silver lining here is the vaccine. The government has said that 200,000 doses of Sinovac, the vaccine from China, is going to arrive here in February and is to be given to medical professionals. And the grand plan is that eventually at least 60 million people will be vaccinated, but no time frame has been given yet. Nevertheless, but as of now, until we get to this point, especially with people still just returning from their New Year's holiday from all across the country, and with the virus being spread around the country, there's concern that things will be worse before they get better.
The beginning of a new year in Malaysia is also a time when many parents are busy getting their children ready for school. A visit to the school's bookstore is a must for 44-year-old Anida Salwani, who has 4 school-going children. She and her husband are checking the list, picking up new books and uniforms. And this year, students are changing to black shoes from white. Although lots of uniforms and shoes last year are still brand new because most of the classes were conducted online, but the kids have grown, which means parents will have to buy new ones as the new school year begins. The Malaysian government is allowing schools to reopen in January after they were shut for half a year following the partial lockdown to contain the coronavirus. While many students have turned to online learning, but poor internet connection and the lack of a tool as well as conducive environment in some places means that it's not accessible to all.
I'm most concerned with 2 of my children because we don't know how much she has covered, we don't know whether she's ready or she has fully understood the whole subject.
Anita, who used to work in the media industry, was retrenched late last year, and her husband too is now jobless. But the couple said they have cut unnecessary spending in order to save for their children's education.
Kalau dulu every week kita pergi makan kat luar contoh so sekarang kita manage okay once a month okay cukup enough.
Terima kasih, Kak. 2021 is another challenging year that worries many parents. Not just is ensuring that there's always food on the table, but beyond that, how to make sure that their children are safe in school.
Student dia rapat-rapat tau. Bila dia kawan apa semua, dia mesti nak dengan kawan dia, makan dengan kawan dia. So kita tak sure kawan dia tu ada positif or not.
It's a tough balancing act between life and livelihood, one that many countries are grappling with in order to get the economy back on track.
People in Singapore started the new year under phase 3 of the country's measures to progressively resume more activities safely while keeping community transmission of COVID-19 low. While it does not mean a return to pre-COVID times, it is still good news as the size of group gatherings has increased from 5 to 8 people for leisure or social activities. Restrictions on religious organizations, funerals, weddings and live performances have also been relaxed. At this hawker centre that's bustling with its usual lunchtime crowd, patrons can now dine in groups of up to 8. So this means that tables with 8 seats or fewer will no longer need any seat markings. Other measures such as the 1 metre safe distancing must still be kept between the different dining groups, and this must also be observed in queuing for food. Contact tracing capabilities like the Safe Entry and Trace Together programs will continue, and safe distancing ambassadors will still be deployed at places like hawker centres to ensure compliance with safe management measures. But despite new cases of COVID-19 being low and mostly imported, people are still cautious.
Even though it's a phase 3, but in our mind here, we still worry about the news. This COVID virus, especially the new variants. All right, so we might be so decided to take precautions.
So I just hope that the vaccine is successful after it's implemented in Singapore. At the end of the day, we can actually spend more time with our family in bigger groups.
Singapore has acquired enough COVID-19 vaccines for citizens and long-term residents, and everyone will be able to get it for free by the third quarter of 2021 if all goes according to plan. But until then, this is the new normal that residents in Singapore will have to adapt to as the world continues to battle against the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite the continuing threat posed by the virus, the availability of the vaccine has given us hope and promise that 2021 will be a much better year. But we also know that things could change dramatically if we let our guards down, because it isn't over until it's over. Meanwhile, stay positive, test negative.